Hey everyone, welcome to the stream tonight. So tonight it's just going to be me and it's going to be Andrew. And yeah, this is also one of those talks. I did mention this previously in the previous one that we had, where we were both speakers at DevConf. And I was fortunate enough to kind of see a bit of Andrew's talk. I found a lot of touch points in terms of front end and a lot of stuff I see happening in the world of front end at the moment. Like his talk is more like general in terms of technology, but yeah, and then I think we can unpack some of the general, like the specific front end questions I have, where I see a lot of the same things happening in front end at the end of the talk. But anyway, so. Then we actually mostly spoke at dinner at DevConf, and I had all these questions I wanted to ask him, and then he kind of very to his own detriment mentioned that he's also in the world of tertiary education, which kind of meant that we spent like an hour just raging about the state of like software education and didn't get to talk exactly and didn't get to talk about any of this stuff. So hopefully tonight we can. Yeah, so I'm happy for us to just get straight into it. Andrew, I'm happy for you to just give a bit of an intro in terms of who you are, what you're going to be talking about, and then as always, everyone, any questions in the text chat, and then like I'll maybe just bring them up as they come, and we can chat about them, or we can chat about all of it at the end. But yeah, Andrew, I'm happy for you to take it away, kind of give a bit of an overview of who you are and what you're going to be talking about.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm Andrew. So I am a senior software engineering trainer. Really, I've been working in industry for over 15 years now in various fields. I honestly can't say I'm much good at front end development. More of my experience is around the back end, so don't expose me to too much that way. But I've always had a real heart for training, and that's what the business that I run is about. It's about supporting software engineers, senior and C-suite, all the stages of how to go further in their journey, whether it's changing technologies or progressing themselves in terms of soft skills or business skills, and I'm there for that. And as Skulk said, I've actually moved since we last talked, so I'm now also working full-time for a university and lecturing there as well. So you can't give them any abuse tonight because I haven't known them well enough. They've been nothing but lovely to me really so far, but we'll see how it goes. It's always good to move the education system forward, especially with technology that's accelerating so fast. But there we go. We'll not start that rant again, will we? So tonight we're going to be looking at my topic, which is an algorithm that nearly killed me. And somebody recently gave me feedback that was I didn't come close enough to death for them. So I apologize in advance, but I'm not exaggerating the story anymore than the truth that's already there from this point of view. But what we're looking at, I hope, is that my personal experience was as a diabetic moving from diabetes that was managed entirely manually in terms of taking injections and reading blood sugars and responding to those based on the numbers that I had in front of me. The choice to move to a pump and a closed loop pump, which in other words takes the readings and tries to respond to the numbers automatically using an algorithm, using some form of machine learning under the hood. And it genuinely had a frankly awful impact. And unless I had managed it in the time that I did, a less experienced diabetic may have had a much more devastating consequence with that. So there's a lot to unpack, I guess, around that story alone. I'm going to introduce, I guess, with that, and then try and finish towards the end with how I think industry could try and reflect on my learnings and see that it's a bigger picture problem, and really that for the most part I think we are letting down our users as an industry with a big brush sweep, as I think we're generally poor, unempathetic, incomplete in terms of our testing, which I think as well, now that we're bringing AI in, is really going to amplify all the problems at 10 times the speed as what we're developing with. So I guess the context is maybe ever so slightly different in terms of where I'm at in Northern Ireland in the UK compared to South Africa. And I say that, but actually the story is nearly worse, I think, in the case of South Africa, because your leading cause of death, according to national statistics, is diabetes. We can't say that in the UK, but it is. And we have a set of guidelines that all of our medical providers follow called NICE guidelines. So I'm going to refer to those a couple of times tonight, not too often. But you have a very similar set of guidelines. I think it's SGT, standard guidelines for treatment, or something like that. I can't quite remember. But those are the kind of things that we're going to be touching on in the first part, which maybe isn't all that relevant. And yet it is, because you need to understand where I'm coming from as the end user and the things that are going through my head on a day-to-day basis to understand them. So pretend that you're developing the pump for a little second and understand where I'm coming from. So I think in terms of me trying to justify who I am as a diabetic, I've been diabetic for 29, nearly 30 years. And there's a lot of diabetics out there that are really badly controlled. And with bad control comes damage. So that often means that there's possibly problems with your feet because circulation doesn't work right, problems with your eyes because you get bleeds as a result of circulation not working right, and lots of other things. Anything that requires circulation essentially can really start to go very, very wrong. And a lot of times, if you go in with a problem that seems like it could be connected to that, it's assumed that you're going to have bad control and it's a problem of your diabetes. And I have to say it quite often can be the case, but certainly in my case, not always the way. So just to give you an idea, here's the range by the NICE guidelines. We use, again, a slightly different set of numbers, but you can do conversions if you really want and you're really keen. But red's bad, always is bad, isn't it? That means you have no control, you have no intention of trying to look after yourself. There are people out there like that. Orange means you're maybe starting to interact and try and give yourself treatment, but you just can't get on top of it. You're going to get telling off by the hospital. They're kind of dread you coming to see them to an extent, but there's maybe hope for you. Yellow means that you're getting closer, so you're still getting told off. There's things you can definitely do better. They might give you a little bit of leeway because it's clear you're making an effort. And green, although it is not the target according to the NICE guidelines, probably means the hospital are happy enough. Okay, so if you're in the green box, you're doing okay. The pale green box is really where you start to see the relationship between you and the healthcare professionals change a little bit, because you're so close to that ridiculous target that we haven't mentioned yet. But actually, because you are the expert that's living with us every day, you might find that the healthcare professionals start to ask you questions. How do you find this, or working with that? Or I need to tell you this, but what's the consequence of that going to be? So it's a really interesting relationship to start to build on. And that blue box, the top of it, the 52, is the ridiculous target that is set by NICE. If you are trying to aim to be lower, it means on average you are lower, and low is an extreme emergency. So there's a fine balance between being lower quite a lot of the time and being low. It can cause problems. Purple is, frankly, you start to be hated by everybody else in the diabetic community because you are doing something that just isn't feasible. And grey, for all intensive purposes, means that you're pretty much not diabetic. There's a label where non-diabetic is grey and pre-diabetic is purple, if you haven't been diagnosed yet. So that gives you an idea really of, if you are already diabetic, how good your control has to be there. And at my last measurement, I was there. Okay, so I'm trying not to show off my control, but to kind of prove to you, as a diabetic, I do know what I'm talking about. I'm fairly healthy in the diabetes part. I'm slightly raging because my mobile app has since told me that I am one number lower than that, and I can't get an official blood reading to tell me that I'm not diabetic. I am, but I want to have the kudos of being there. So let me reframe this slightly. Rather than coming to you as an engineer, let me come to you first of all as a diabetic that knows what's going on, and to try and appeal to you as engineers, as quality assurance, as designers and leaders in your teams and your industry, for what I would like to see changing going forwards. And if you don't take anything else away from this talk, take this phrase away. Because it doesn't matter what you're working with or how you're working with it, your tests are probably passing right now, certainly for anything that you've put into production. But that does not mean that your users are safe. It doesn't. Now, let me show you a medical example, but we'll start to see where else this affects users outside of just a purely medical approach. So this is where we started off. So this was May last year, so just over a year ago. And you can see on the screen a piece of technology run on my mobile phone. I've got a pump that's connected in. And really what we see then is this idea where the blue box that goes along the portrait screen, it is saying that's the range that you want to target. The black dots or the white dots, if it's a white dot, it means it's out of range, so too high or too low. And anything black then is in the blue box, and that's in range. So we want to be in range around 70-75% of the time. So straight out the bat, you can see there's a few on the left that are out of range, and then fairly well into range straight away. Here's the problem before we even started. We had to use simulation data to train how to use this, get familiar with pressing the buttons so we weren't pressing buttons when it was actually us. Those white dots that are appearing as data on the screen are simulation data that never disappeared. Don't get me started. But that already was leaving me a little bit uncomfortable. You can see here that black line is kicking in just before 12:30. That is because it takes an hour for the system to start up for the first time. So what happened was we had training that started at 11 o'clock, and by about 11:30, they had the equipment all plugged in and said, yeah, this is going to turn on an hour, and then the training finished at 12. So actually we had finished our training of how to use it, but the thing hadn't even started yet. So there's a whole other set of learning problems that we could potentially take away. And yet these are not indicative of the problems that were about to come. Maybe the attitude, yes, but not the problems themselves. And one other thing I will mention, which still rattles my cage because it's happened more since, it's a follow-up talk for another time, is that actually in the training, they turned around and said, we cannot legally advise you to turn off the automatic software updates for your operating system of your phone. Who says that? They're implying straight away that their testing hasn't been sufficient to work with new updates. And then they turn around and say, but we can advise you to turn off the automatic app updates for our app, because we admit that there's been problems with rollout in the past and crashes that we've had to fix. So we would rather that you didn't update straight away, that we can figure out essentially the process is live. They didn't say that, but that was the implication. And straight away I'm going, should I be on this call or should I throw in this pump out the window? But I thought I'd stick at it. And I regretted it at first, but I got a trip to South Africa to talk about it, so I can't really complain too much, can I, Scott? But
sorry, can I quickly interrupt you? So
yeah.
Just like for myself and obviously people that aren't familiar with this, so okay, so this is an app that you were using.
Yes, so for clarity, I guess, so
yes.
I never show the pump, I never even show the app. I recolor code everything as well, because the story's not about the provider. But what happens is there's a sensor on my arm, and that is constantly reading the sugar in the blood. I have a cannula plugged into leg or hip or stomach that's delivering insulin all the time. So I should have said that when the duck appeared with the thing in the cannula. But anyway, that was the purpose of the duck. So it is constantly delivering insulin or no insulin. And the two officially are meant to talk in an interim device and respond accordingly. So what has happened is you've created the app on a phone, and that's the interim interface.
Okay, so this is a device that you had, and the app is kind of like the way to interface with the device.
Yes.
Is this like a very common device, or is this something that's a bit more kind of rare, experimental? I have no context, so I'm just asking.
So this device in UK wise is very popular. Okay, so it's not uncommon. It's in the grand scheme of diabetic management, it's less common, but it's going to become much more popular. Worldwide, it is reasonably popular, and I think the key thing to take away from this, which is kind of a spoiler for what comes next, but doesn't matter. This device, if you look at it, is not actually unique. There's many other devices out there that, if you combine their popularity, they are the imminent future. And that's where all diabetics are expected to go in terms of treatment. Injections are meant to become a thing of the past in the next couple of years. But the problems that I'm about to go through, I went to other providers and said, look, if I come to you, will you tell me you do things differently? And all the sales teams were great at those first initial contacts. And as soon as I said, will you do this differently, in every instance, communication stopped.
Oh, okay. And
so
just
it's an industry problem.
Yeah, no, it usually is. And so then maybe the last question is, like this, it sounds like there was some direct communication with you and the team, or not? Or are you just saying, like, when they said, oh, the app or whatever, is that just through like general mailers or whatever? I'm just curious because I have no idea what this is even like.
So what they did in terms of setting up was they had a 1-hour Zoom session. And in that Zoom session, there was a representative from our healthcare trust, so one of the nurses from the area, and then a training person from their company, the providing company. And that company provided the training, and the idea was that the healthcare person was there to support that and say, well, this is how we arrange your prescriptions now, or this is how we feed into that. So they provided the training, but then as soon as you finish the training, all your contact goes through the healthcare person after that.
I see. Okay, cool. Yeah, that clarifies it. Yeah.
No, great question. And I apologize. I totally missed explaining the point of insulin, which kind of gives the context away, but there we go.
No, go for it.
It's useful. So this is where we started. I mean, it looks reasonably flat. So bearing in mind this system it's closed loop, so it has to learn. The thing is that when you get up in the morning, the hormones that get you up in the morning, and adrenaline being one of them, for example, and a couple of others, they stop the way insulin works. So if you are not diabetic, your body will naturally produce more insulin, knowing that that's the case. But for me as a diabetic, I have to have some way of getting more insulin into me at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's called dawn phenomena. And there's lots of things like that. So exercise, for example, brings your blood sugar down there and then, but the recovery of the muscles, even for up to 2 days afterwards, can cause a small pull down. So there's lots of things that need to be learned from that point of view. So when you get a graph like this, where again, looking at just the black and white dots, you can see, it goes up, but the pink line is it delivering insulin. So you can see it gives insulin and it comes back down, and then it stops giving insulin and it starts to creep back up again. So it gives more insulin and it comes back down. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at this going, wow, it's working. And the peaks are starting to get a wee bit smaller, and the line is getting closer to being in the blue. And even if you're thinking 75% of that has to be in the blue box, that's pretty flipping close in the first day. Sorry, like is a very Northern Irish thing. I don't know that. I'll try not to say that. But it's really good for day one. And then you sort of go, well, let's spread it out into day two and see what happens. And actually, there was a wee bit. So, you know, that morning thing where it's trying to learn how your morning routine works. Yeah, struggled a wee bit, but it brought it back down. And then look, it's nearly like from 4 o'clock onwards to 8 o'clock the next day, it's way more than 90% in range. This is phenomenal. And I was like, this is really cool. It raised a few things for me. Like I couldn't say when I was going to bed, or I couldn't really say, there's a part of it said, stop giving me as much insulin for a while, which is maybe implying that you're about to do exercise, but it can't sort of, there's no input to say, I'm going for a light walk with the dog, or I'm going for a 200-meter swim sprint session. You know, there's none of that input, which caused me a little bit of concern. But I thought, you know what, for the way this is working, we'll make it work. And then though, this is where it started to go wrong, because after hour 72, there's a wee bit of a dip, but then massive spike. And to sort of paint the picture, so 10 is the maximum really we go to. You can go to 11 or 12, but you might have longer term damage starting to appear. Once you get to the 14s, 15s, 16s mark, you don't have enough insulin to move the sugar where it needs to go. You start to get then your body responding to try and get rid of that excess sugar. So how does it do it? Pees it out. So you need to go to the bathroom. So you're peeing out a lot of water. What else does your body need? It needs to drink. So you get really thirsty, and then you're starting to dehydrate. But at the same time, you're not getting the sugar going where it needs to go, because you're essentially peeing it out instead of moving it into cells. So your cells all start to run out of energy, and they start to tire and slow down, and then start to go through chemical processes of breaking down. So at around this 15, 16 mark, I'm not really feeling all that well. It's not wonderful, but it's not entirely abnormal. If you forgot to inject or something, you'd feel that after a couple of hours, and you fix it, and it takes a couple of hours to fix. But you can see it appears like it's given me a good whopping dose there. Like it hits the over 3 units per hour mark, and probably if you integrate it under that curve, it probably is given maybe 2 units. So it's trying, or it looks like it's trying, except that graph kept going up. And here's where the first big problem, if that wasn't a big problem, here's where the first big problem, where this graph was sort of suggesting that it's delivering me 3 or 2.75 or whatever number of units per hour, depending on what bit of the peak you read. But actually, if you look at the pump itself, it's reading 0 units per hour, and it's reading 0 units per hour for the next 23 minutes. That does not register on that graph whatsoever. So already there's a problem where what the app is saying with the algorithm in the app and the pump, which is doing only what the algorithm tells it to do, the two aren't lining up. So I'm concerned here. So that's going up. The advice given was, well, turn it off, give yourself an injection, bring it back down again, see what happens, or you could persevere if you want and see how it goes. So I persevered for a bit, because you can sort of see there that the curve is starting to flatten a bit, and it did actually flatten. It started to dip down. It was bedtime then, so I thought, you know what, it's dipping down, I'll go to bed, it'll be fine. What I didn't realize was that although it did dip, so around here it was coming down again and sort of held, and the pump says it's given this insulin, which would imply to me that because it was coming down, there must be insulin there. Actually, it continued to appear to give insulin, but you see my blood sugars going up and up and up and up. If I wasn't feeling well before at the 15 mark, hitting that 21 mark really isn't pleasant. And I was sleeping. I woke up, and you can imagine, you know, if you have someone that's had heat stroke or they're dehydrated or whatever, that feeling of nausea and sickness and the room spinning, and then all the other bits with extreme thirst, the pain of your muscles not getting anything. My body was starting to shut down at this point. And I looked and persevered, but it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and there is an out of hours service you can phone, but they're only available between 8 and 5 Monday to Friday, so that wasn't any good to me either. What we're seeing is an algorithm that claims to be doing something, a possible evidence that the two aren't necessarily communicating. I did everything. I feel like I'm a reasonable engineer, at least in terms of my instincts, so I never blindly trust a system. I try to induce systematic thinking, so I was looking at the hardware involved. So I looked at the cannula, I changed it, I looked at the insulin in case it maybe overheated for some reason while I lay on top of it. It's not feasible, that shouldn't happen, but I was new to this and thought, who knows. I changed all those things. I changed the battery just in case if you tried turning it off and on again. I was going through all those basic things, and really the only thing that I ruled in, the only thing I couldn't rule out was the software, and even that glitch that we saw wasn't consistent, but it said it was delivering, and I couldn't see the effect of the delivery. So the pump felt like it was doing this brilliant job, but you can see from the graph it really wasn't. And there's a condition that I don't know if people have heard of, sepsis. Sepsis is where you have an infection, and in fighting the infection, the remainder of that starts to turn your blood acidic, and that's where it's bad and why you need to fix that fast. Anything that turns your blood acidic is bad. When you have sugar that you can't get rid of, the body in a panic says convert it, and what it converts it into is ketones, and ketones in themselves are acidic. So what was happening here was I was developing what's known as diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, and that was deadly. That's literally hours to fix, because otherwise, as soon as you start to get the acidic blood, your kidneys start to shut down. That means you're not processing things. You have then toxins that are going around your head. In the shock of things, then your body starts to shut every organ that it can figure out down. Then you start to seize because your brain is essentially swelling and doing things that it shouldn't. You go into a coma, and then you can imagine if you don't have healthcare interventions by the time you're in a coma, it's not long till you're gone altogether. So it really wasn't that far away at this stage. And I just decided, screw this, grabbed my injections and gave myself a whopping dose of injection, and that's where it came down. The coming down was nothing to do with the pump or that massive pink spike that you see. It was entirely to do with the manual injection. So it continues to read what's going on. The advice is to turn the pump off at that stage, so the app can still take the blood sugars, which is why you see the dots. So I turned the phone off, but you can see there that pink line never drops down to 0, but the pump was off. Interface problem, whatever you want to call it, something's not right there. Got in contact with the hospital when the line opened about 8 o'clock. Swear words came from the nurse when she heard the values of blood sugars I was getting, the experience had gone through, and panic ensued, but it was all good. And then, of course, what happens a few hours later, turn it back on, you should be fine to go now. It's just a blip. The algorithm needs to learn, and it just trust it. It'll settle down. Look what happens straight away again. And this time it's not even trying to give the insulin to go with it. I think that's nearly more infuriating. It's like compared to the responsiveness of what was there before. It's insane. But anyway, and it went higher than ever before. So that was another dump it and go injections and contact and see what's going on. The company here had no real interest in knowing it. Again, their response to everything is almost always, you just need to trust the algorithm. It's still learning, it takes time, but it will settle. Well, that's no good for me. So there's issues I have since identified just from observation and keeping notes and jotting things down in spreadsheets and that kind of thing. I think it keeps a running average. So I think it keeps a running average over 3 to 4 days. I think it's around the 3.5 mark. And if your control is really good over 3 days and you've set a slightly higher average target, it lets it crawl up so that the lower average comes up to the higher average instead of going, that's better than expected, don't change it. So I feel like there's a wrong algorithm in place and a misunderstanding in terms of target setting. But anyway, there's other mad things that we could talk about, but I'm not going there for this really. But this is where it becomes, I guess, scarier, if that wasn't bad enough. So I like to talk about looking beyond the edge cases, and in diabetes, then you should never really be less than 4 in terms of your blood sugar measurement. If 4 is going into what we call a hypo, low glycemic sugar, low sugar emergency, so you need sugar to bring it back up. Insulin causes it to go down. So at 4, there should be no insulin given whatsoever, and you should be getting sugar to bring it slightly up. There's an interesting thing with the pump where, because you have a little cannula, if you don't deliver a little amount of fluid on a regular basis, there's the possibility that it jams up or blocks just because it dries out or it doesn't move through. So it has a little thing that pushes 0.1 units per hour. Just to make sure that there's something going through that cannula. And the question then really is, what happens if you are sitting just less than 4 for maybe more than an hour, or in that hour as the 1 hour bit comes up to time? And to give you context, 0.1 of a unit. So for me, as a longer living diabetic, as you get older, you develop resistance to the insulin. That's what type 2 diabetes actually is. It's where you have resistance to your own insulin. But you develop this resistance to the normal insulin that you inject or pump in or whatever way. But actually, for me, 1 unit brings me down by 1.5 millimoles. So 1 unit would bring me from 15, for example, down to about 13 and a half, which seems okay actually. But for a brand new diabetic, they don't have that sensitivity, and 0.1 of a unit could bring them down by half. So it could bring them from 15 to 14.5. They don't need anywhere near the same amount to get the blood sugar down. So 0.1 of a unit could potentially be a scary amount to a brand new diabetic. So when I put this graph up, which shows very clearly that the blood sugar is just under that 4 mark, sort of the 3.8, 3.7 mark maybe, that little pink blip is insulin being delivered when the user is already having a hypo. So for this, from my point of view, this is what I refer to as the edge cases between the edge cases. It's where I have edge case 1 and edge case 2, but there's a dangerous cavernous space where they're independently safe, but we never try and put all the combinations together. And as an engineer, maybe we just haven't had that insight from our product owner, but have we asked the question to go looking for it? And it goes beyond, diabetes pumps. I would say that if you look at payment systems, for example, if you validate card numbers and you've got currency conversion, well, what happens when you get a card that's declined halfway through the currency conversion and throw a network partition in there at the same time? Because that's not an edge case of validation or an edge case of conversion or an edge case of network handling. That's an edge that's between all three. It's where they all intersect, and have we anticipated that? So that's one example. Think about social media, where you have an algorithm and it's correctly trying to revoke or ignore extreme content. It's trying to boost good content with high engagement. But if you've got somebody that's marked as gives good stuff and you've got something that's marked as extreme, but the extreme stuff, one of these people goes looking to say, I think what you're doing is a disgrace, or I totally disagree with this, or that's horrible. The popularity of them going to say, we disagree with this with good intentions, all of a sudden what you start to see with the comments and maybe some of the sharing, have you seen this, and you pass it on quietly, privately in the background, all of a sudden you start to see these posts gaining popularity and appearing in places where they wouldn't normally appear, and polarizing people that we weren't intending necessarily to radicalize, but because they've had things in common with this and seeing stuff from here that they weren't meant to see, actually those two sides of the same algorithm conflict, and we see that happening. The news is full of it all the time, but we never quite address it as edge cases between edge cases. We just say that Elon or whoever it is they're just not the best people and they don't care. But do we care? I guess. And with all that, then, if you turn around and say, well, we now have systems that are learning and adapting, we're not just dealing with rules that we wrote anymore. We're potentially dealing with patterns that the system has discovered on its own. And those patterns might make perfect sense by themselves, but we can't anticipate the dangerous interactions that they are potentially going to cause, or at least we certainly can't in their fullness. And my pump's the example. It was learning, it was adapting. We could see that, and learning my insulin sensitivity, throw in meal patterns and exercises and all those good things. But somewhere in that learning, it started to find patterns and intersection edge cases that led it confidently to say, I am doing this, but I'm not. And the direction wasn't going in the right way anymore. And the reality is that our traditional testing approaches that we have relied on in years, and to be really, really frank, we have probably been doing in a really crappy way for years. When you talk with engineers and you consult with businesses, testing tends to be the bottom of the software developer's priority. That's not for everybody, but I think we could all put our hands up and say, I could have tested that better. Integration tests are not really going to catch that either. And even if we're looking at end-to-end tests, like unless we know which ends we're definitely going to, we can't say we have done full end-to-end testing. All we can say is we've done end-to-end testing that matches what we understand. So we're limited to the scenarios we can imagine when we're handing things over to systems that are giving us the thumbs up, the green ticks, but the volcanoes going off in the background, because we've given them blinkers and narrowed the thought in terms of that. And it's really to say again and again that feeling safe, writing tests like here where we have 100% test coverage and all the green ticks seems wonderful, but actually setting this nominal threshold coverage of 70% or 80%, or saying our pipeline is happy and green and wonderful, and our builds are green and our tests are passing and the coverage is great. But that is not the same in any way, shape, or form as the system actually being safe. And there's more than just me saying this. There's a scandal. I don't know if you'll have heard of it or not, but in the UK, it's been going on for probably about 10 years now, longer actually, but only really came to the forefront relatively recently, where a local TV company produced a drama about a set of post office masters. And basically what happened was there was a company produced a system called Horizon, and it was discovering that these postmasters were defrauding the post office. They were taking money and hiding it away somewhere, and things weren't right. So this was flagged up. They were prosecuted, they were put in prison, and that was the end of their careers. Their families fell apart, and that was that. What came about was a massive protest from those families that they didn't think that things had happened the way that they were being accused of. But it's a computer system. You can trust the computer system. The system says this is the way it was. You can't argue with the system. But what it turned out was that after a huge amount of investigation from journalists, from the TV companies, and the post office, the software development company, the government even pushing back and saying, don't talk nonsense. It turned out the software was wrong. And it wasn't just being occasionally wrong, little blips. It was being systematically, catastrophically wrong. And the thing that sort of nearly keeps me awake at night is that I am fairly certain, or at least I certainly hope, that their test coverage was decent and that their builds were all green and that they had QA sign off. But the problem wasn't, I hope, that they didn't test. The problem was that they weren't testing and anticipating the problems in the right things. They were testing transactions that process correctly, but they weren't testing what happens when the network fails in the middle of that transaction. Or they were testing that audit trails were complete, but they weren't testing whether that audit trail could actually lie to them from that point of view. So they were fully in testing the implementation. No debate about that, or at least that's my assumption. But they were not testing for impact. And the sad thing about this is that you look and go, oh, well, okay, it's really bad that maybe some people went to prison over a poorly designed piece of software. But it's worse than that, where people carried out suicide. Who deals with that? Whose fault is that? Because you could turn around and say, well, the government purchased it and the post office ran it, but it was software engineers that built it. So where does that responsibility lie? It doesn't have to be a life-critical system for it to be a life-destroying problem when it goes wrong. And then we add machine learning into that, where we have then potentially a problem that gets worse if we don't manage it right, because we now then get a system that's making decisions and it's based on patterns that it has found in data, patterns that we sometimes won't understand, patterns which might actually be correlations, and they're masquerading as causations. Patterns that might be amplifying biases, and biases that we maybe even didn't know we had or existed in the data that it's being learned from. And it goes back to that idea that we saw happened. It was the advice of the pump company, and it's the same scary attitude with naive people bringing in machine learning in general. It's going to learn and improve itself. And you can't argue with that. It will learn. But the question is whether or not it's going to learn the right things or the wrong things. And there's a difference there. And in my case, the pump did learn. And I don't have the screenshot. I wish I did. I just haven't got one since either, which is a good thing, I guess. But the next day, when I was sitting at my normal blood sugar level back in range again, it had learned that the previous 2 days that I needed a whopping amount of insulin at that time. And it gave me the 6 units an hour that hadn't registered properly the 2 days before, thinking that was going to keep me in range. And next thing I go from being here, where I had been here yesterday, to being down here. Severe hypo, a different, faster emergency caused by learning that's gone wrong. So I don't know, as an engineer thinking about that, I kind of feel uncomfortable already. But for me, this is the uncomfortable bit. In modern teams, the question of who's responsible for actually catching that, because the trend, I think, and I'll take debate as to whether I'm right or wrong, we're kind of gradually killing off that traditional dedicated tester role. It used to be 2 separate roles, but we're trying to have these T-shaped individuals, which is what I've nearly forgotten that terrible graphic is about. It's this person trying to be a T. And that's really great in theory because we have quality as a team sport. But have we actually trained the team properly, deeply, fully in that new role and given time to find it? We talk about TDD, test-driven development, but how many people, when they claim to do it, actually write the test of that focus first and not some flavor or version of it? We talk maybe about BDD, behaviour-driven development or design, but how many of us will actually write gherkin scenarios that capture the real user risk and not just a feature checklist of things that kind of reassure us but don't test the safety of the user? I think we've distributed the responsibility, is what I'm trying to suggest, but I don't think we have distributed expertise fully with that. We're shipping these systems that make decisions that affect real lives, but we're not necessarily doing anything different. We have that same testing rigor that we use for systems when we were just shuffling database records around, and that's maybe a slight dramatization of things, but I fundamentally I don't think we're that far away from that statement in terms of where we're at. So where is the new testing? Where is the new style? Where is the new training to go with that? So for me, I want to say things where I think we can take this. So strategies, I guess, where rather than just testing implementation, we're testing for impact. And these aren't necessarily all technical in terms of brand new frameworks or whatever to plug into it. And I appreciate with these, I can talk side tangent in this later, where there's a mismatch between business and developer, where you have to get this out by Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and you go, well, I have to give up on testing, or I don't have time for these things. But actually, I think a lot of these strategies have impact in terms of habit, in terms of building it into your everyday, where actually it's not anything that's overly excessively time consuming or effort consuming, but actually it will give a far better picture and actually potentially reduce some of the confusion and discussion that happens in your team, and gives you something to point back to, especially at the end of a sprint when you find that you just have a couple of hours and a few developers that want something to do. Point them towards some of these and say, what can we do better? So the first thing that I would suggest is creating an interaction matrix, where what we're trying to do is take our edge cases, maybe put them along a column, and then we take or a row, sorry, and then we take a column and put the edge cases down there, and we just line them up, and we can see where these interactions start to appear, and we can say, well, it's impossible for that to ever happen, or we can say, well, that it's possible that could happen, but this is what will happen if it does. How do we fix that? Or maybe highlight a definite problem. If these two things do happen at the same time, and figure out what we're doing with those. So it's pretty much a spreadsheet, and put it out that way. And think about even this one. So if you have maybe the fraud flag as an example, and the rate hit limit, where you have in a bank or whatever financial system, the fraud detection sees that there's suspicious activity. Maybe I was in Spain a couple of weeks ago, so using the card, they actually did flag me, and I was able to phone and say, look, it is me. So they've correctly identified that. But if you didn't realize that was the case, or the feedback wasn't necessarily there, you might try to log in a couple of times, and then they attempt to not tell you what you're doing wrong, because you don't want to give the game away to brute force or whatever it is. Actually, you don't get the full picture that you've actually locked yourself out then as a result of rate limiting. So you can contact the fraud team and they say, yep, no problem, we'll unlock that. But actually at the same time, you're still locked out because of the rate limiting. So the two flags can't be lifted. How do we deal with that? Both systems think they're doing the right thing. Both systems have a response. But when those two things happen at the same time, how do we unlock it? How do we get the best case scenario for the user? Is it possible that this will happen to the user? And 100% it is. So the edge case, in this case, the matrix that's there is there just to cause discussion, and to suggest things that you can put on your backlog, or things that need redesigned, or even in earlier standards, maybe you'll design around that. But it's simple. There's nothing complicated there, but it can really drive discussion. And get people thinking, if this happens, what happens this? Oh, these two things can never happen. It tells a picture even in itself in doing that. The second thing I would suggest would be to turn around and write property-based tests, and write them for your constraints. So it's not just the usual property-based of given this input, expect this output, but actually being specific and saying, given any input that meets this criteria, then the properties must always hold. Like the comment says in this one, given any dangerous blood sugar, always expect insulin to be 0. Okay, so that's what I would expect if my blood sugar is less than a certain value. So in this case, 3.5, I know I'd mentioned 4 earlier, or whatever it is that you're going for. if you aim for 4 every time, it'd be there's other complications. But again, there's only so much you can learn in an hour. There's a reason why we pick out more than that when we're learning our user. But you can imagine the same thing where, you know, in a fintech situation, again, if the transaction is marked as complete, then the customer's charged exactly once. It doesn't matter how many retries or timeouts or network partitions there are. It's not necessarily what property-based testing entirely is, but it's setting that rule out so it's clear, it's black and white, sorry, and our developers, no matter how junior, can see that and go, okay, there's a picture for me. Clearly, there's a story somewhere that matches this. There's an experience that has brought us to this. And using the likes of your hypothesis or your fast check or your quick check, they're all commonly available. So why not use them? It's not a big issue in terms of putting it there. Third thing that I would suggest is implementing chaos engineering. Now, this isn't something that I would always have said. I think for a good while I was against selling chaos engineering because everybody saw Netflix and went, oh, we want to be just like them. And actually not everybody is Netflix. You don't need that chaos all the time. It doesn't work for you. But I think you could reasonably easily implement chaos engineering for your business logic more than just your infrastructure. So we have, you know, distributed systems that we test. We look at kill pods and simulated network failures and all those kind of things. But what could we do to the business rules? So write tests that are going to randomly combine the edge case flags that we put in, and they verify that invariants hold. So we simulate what happens when we have a learning model that's getting data from distribution shifts and those shifts that it hasn't been trained on. How does it react to those? Or fraud detection, legitimate patterns from those coming from countries that we have no data for. Well, how are we responding to that? You know, so we can anticipate those things through using the business logic to generate chaos from that point of view. So those are, again, an idea. Chaos engineering is expensive, it takes time, but, you know, if you're leaving the office at 6 o'clock at night, you could let it run at 10 past 6 and it'll be done when you come back in the morning again, you know. So there's ways of making it work, and there's experiences that you can learn from it, and then places you might even apply it to other bits of your project as well. And what I mentioned there was invariance. My fourth recommendation would be to document and then always test your must never invariance, and do it explicitly. Where you have a file, maybe it's invariance.md, or maybe it is, oh, the name's gone out of my head. I've got Trello in my head, and that's not the right thing. Kanban board, or not Kanban board. Oh, I'm feeling on my feet. That's all right.
Backlog?
Wasn't even backlog. Jira. Oh, close. You have it
Close
on your
enough.
Jira pages or whatever it is. Like, who likes Jira? I like it less now because it's made me look stupid. But you know, having those in place where you have very clearly, these are the invariants. These are the things that must never happen. So we must never charge a customer without confirmation. It's simple, but we write it down and we make it clear. We must never show one user another user's data. It's simple, but it's explicit by doing it. And then what we do is we write a dedicated test for each. We don't necessarily do it as some other part of the test suite. What we have is a dedicated, explicit, always run these tests that exist solely to verify the invariance. And it means that if anything goes wrong, the key thing is that these tests are going to fail loudly. It's not just a wee quiet log line. It's not a metric that goes up over time. It's a big red failed. It's going to say absolutely not, to the point where it will send a message to the senior engineer in charge and go, this has gone wrong and you should be worried. It might be easily fixed, but at least it's flagging it. It's failing loudly because you have breached an invariant, the must nevers, as far as that goes. Number 5 is making sure, in terms of machine learning specifically, that you are testing the decision boundaries for consistency. We're not just measuring accuracy. So in the case here of credit scores in the UK, for example, you might have a model that's measured in terms of accuracy. So it's 95% accurate in guessing what your approval is going to, chances of approval are if you go for a credit card or a mortgage or something like that. But if you have a credit scoring model which gives one person 699 and their identical twin who's made every identical life decision 700, which is rejected and approved, as you can see by the diagram, well, what's changed between them? And can you explain it? Is there consistency there, or is that, you know, part of the 95% accuracy part where some are going to go wrong? Because as much as that seems like a duh moment, you'd be surprised the number of places that don't test for that. They assume that it'll probably be okay, but you can imagine that's the difference between getting a mortgage and not getting a mortgage. That's a life moving forward and getting stalled potentially, depending on where you're at. So writing tests that sit right at your decision threshold, verifying the model's behavior is then stable, and that it's even better explainable. So testing for small changes and making sure those small changes don't make a big difference, and in some cases wildly different outcomes. So test right on the decision boundaries and make sure we've got them right there. We're all about observability these days. Build that into your business logic more than just your infrastructure. So making sure that we have metrics, we have traces where we can see when we have rules that interact in unexpected ways. We log it. We have something that's monitoring for those logs. We see dashboards that flag edge cases happening and frequency of intersections. If it genuinely is a once-off, well, we'll maybe think about it at some stage, but if it happens with 100 people, we're maybe starting to get more worried. And, you know, in my case, maybe the system could have alerted where if the attempted insulin delivery was made and the blood sugar was less than 4 and the cannula needed cleared and there was recent exercise, you know, all things that would cause that to crash, the medical team would get a flag to say you need to investigate this in some way and then pass on the results. Is there an actual concern here? Was it user mismanagement, or was there a genuine problem with the system? So that's, you know, from a diabetic point of view, thinking about payments wise, if you had a fraud flag and a legitimate user pattern and first transaction in a new country, when those actually overlap, do we get the flag and do we get the review then automatically as a result? So building observability into our business logic and trying to make that work. That's probably one of the more difficult ones. I'll put my hands up, and that will take more work. But I think as we're going through this, it's something we do need to think about longer term. Seventh, maybe seemed obvious at first glance, but implementing feature flag controls for our rule interactions. So we maybe have business units that are deploying different parts, a new rule or a new machine learning model. We're not just turning them on for everyone. We generally don't want to do that anyway. But I think we need to be having feature flags and gradually enabling for different interactions. So going back to the idea of the fraud idea, you have this new version of fraud detection, which seems to work fine. You've got retry logic, which seems to work fine. So turn that flag on for 10% of your people and turn the other flag on for 10% of your people, but then have a separate 5% that has both on. And we make sure one tests in isolation and one works in isolation, and the two together are working for 5. And then we roll that out and we say, well, we've got 10 here and 10 here. Let's turn on the other flag for them. And then now that we've got 25% that it seems to be working for, let's roll it out for the other 75 and hope it's working. And there'll be different metrics and different balances for that, but it's making sure that we're documenting that we're anticipating that, and that we never just put 2 features out at the same time, and that we've proven that there's more than just gradual rollout, but the ability to turn off specific combinations if they go wrong, and then we don't have to roll back because we've controlled that in a way. So that's number 7. Number 8, which I say nearly in anything I say, to be honest, is what about your threat model? Do you use it? And the number of people that turn around and say, what's a threat model, or should I have one of those, is still scary. But if it's used and it's updated correctly and regularly, it's going to constantly show the data flow and the crucial, critical, valuable points where we trust data and where we don't trust it. So raise your expectations on the boundaries. And if they're vulnerable to attack, remember that they're going to be more precious to the goal that's trying to be achieved as well. So protect that at all costs. Okay. I guess as well, it's also going to remind us that the flows that we haven't looked at in a while, maybe they're still there, and maybe we haven't tested our implementation for the impact as well as just the security tests. So it's a nice pointer to look at. If you haven't got it from this already, I would say you need to really get to know the people that we're providing for and what they actually need. You know, engineers, there's a wall. If you're doing traditional pure agile, you should be talking to the product owner, but I know there's no separation for time management and money management as a result. You know, we can understand where the pure ideas don't always work, but we need to have communication with the user. We need to be asking the questions that are going to make us think how things actually work and understand what's going on, because that's where the greater impact's going to be. The team leaders looking after the engineers need to get to know them too, by the way. We need to make sure that if they are struggling in testing, that they get training for it and support for it. And if they are asking for it, give it to them. And industry, we need to understand our machines. We need to make sure that they are learning the right things, and we need to be able to prove that we can trust those decisions and make sure that we can show what it's learning is correct, in the hope that the user, the diabetic with the pump, is able to be friends with the engineer that makes great software. The other one has correctly finished the course and says how to test in the background and has done the tests in the foreground. The team leader, which is slightly ageist but has a grey beard, and there we go, is celebrating, and in the background the humans and the robots are dancing together in perfect harmony. Isn't that the goal? But it takes a lot of effort to go there. And my last thing, number 10, is just to say, ask the uncomfortable question. Would you trust this system with your health? If it was your money, would you trust this system? If there was the possibility you could go to prison as a result of a poor decision, would you trust it? And I think increasingly, that's exactly what we're asking our users to do, is to trust this system, trust us with your health, trust us with your money. And if your response as an engineer is, well, probably, or mostly, or for most cases, I would trust it, well, I don't want to work with you, to be honest. That's not you done testing. That is not you putting the user first. And that's a blanket statement. I know people will immediately come back and say, but profit and business drive, and, you know, where do we get the balance? We can talk about that. I do concede a little bit to that point where it's hard to find the balance, but there's still discussions to be had, I guess. So from this whole thing, what I really learned was that the system was confident, but even with that confidence, I was clearly in danger. The tests had passed, you know, it's a medical device that's gone through rigorous testing, but I was still in danger, and the algorithm was clearly learning, but in learning the wrong thing, it was putting me in even greater danger than before. We're an industry really that's moved from processing data to making decisions. So it means that we're thinking about automating tasks to replacing judgment for the most part. And whilst we're putting that autonomous nature in place, we're still doing it with testing practices that were really designed for that simpler era of where we have really transitioned from at this stage. So yes, I'm not saying stop writing unit tests, keep doing that, keep hitting those coverage metrics, keep your builds green, but please do not confuse that with actually keeping your users safe. Test the edge cases between the edge cases. Test for impact. Don't be just testing for coverage. Document everything that should not happen. Design with transparency, design with override, and ask yourself that hard question about whether you would trust your own system with something that really matters. And like I said, really, your tests are probably passing right now, but that doesn't mean that your users are safe. So that's my thoughts. Skulk, I went on. You didn't interrupt me, so I just kept going. But Q&A time. What do you think? What do you want to comment
Yeah,
on?
no, that was phenomenal. Like as mentioned, I only saw a bit of this because I had to prepare my own talk. But this is great. Yeah, I have so many questions, and so I just wanted to say, anyone else listening, you're welcome to pop any questions in the text chat. I'll throw it up here on the screen, and we can unpack that a bit as well. But yeah, I'll just dive straight into it from my side. So. I so in terms of summarizing, so what exactly is it that went wrong? Can you conclusively say what went wrong, or like is it just like the algorithm just acted weird and went wild? Like,
So I have an opinion. For legal purposes, I have an opinion.
yes, because I was waiting for that the whole time. I was
What
waiting
went wrong?
for the whole time for like, and then we looked and we found out, oh, this is what was happening, but it never came. So, but I don't want to put you in a position where you're kind of like legally exposing yourself now. You can also.
So my opinion is that they're using the wrong algorithm. So I mentioned earlier that there's a choice in systems. So you can use a moving average where you look back at the previous 3 days, 3 months, whatever it is, and say, well, based on what I've learned from peaks and troughs, I anticipate the peak or trough's going to come. And you use that to feed what comes next. So the last 3 days, you've needed an extra 10%. So I'm guessing today you're probably going to need 10%. And you look and say, well, actually, with that, my target is nominal value 7. You've been running at 8. So I need to get you not just down to 7, but I need to get you down to like 6 for a little while. And I use that to average out, which also means, as a result, if your target is 7, but you're sitting at a absolutely phenomenal 4.5. So you're sitting 2.5 under target, but that's what a non-diabetic sits at anyway. So it's not a problem. It means that actually to bring your average up, if you've been using 4 days at 4.5, well, to get your running average up to 7, you need to rock it up to like 25 for a couple of hours. And what's it going to do? So I believe that there's a couple of age managements that stop that necessarily going to the extremes. So it won't let you go up to like 30 something, but I believe that it's the wrong calculation. And actually there are other systems out there that manage grass. So it's at PID is what we would use. And I was taught PID with sheet plastic in factories. So whenever you when you start a PID controller, you can choose. So you can either decide that when you're trying to get the perfect 2 mils of plastic sheet, you waste the first 30 centimeters because you give it too much and then too little, and then it sort of oscillates down.
Yes.
Or you can say, oh, I just want to get there over time. But then in the steadiness of not wasting anything, it could be, 2 meters before you get there. So there's different versions of it. And I think that's what should be used in blood sugar control, because you can set it to not oscillate. You can set it to have that flatter approach to get there. Or you could set it in between where, and the problem with my system, I also believe, is that it doesn't take enough information in. And there's only so much it could give. But if I was to give it, for example, smartwatch data, where I tap the button to say I'm exercising, which every health app does now in some way, shape, or form, there's nothing for me at the moment to feed into the pump data that I am exercising. So there's a whole heap of potentials that it could take in that add complexity. And what I would say is this system is being made for badly controlled diabetics to get them close to range. I genuinely do think they weren't expecting a me. That sounds cocky, but they weren't expecting a me where the control was really good to start with.
Exactly.
And that highlights the problems with the algorithms because it doesn't get hidden in the extremes. So I think certainly in the UK's case, they're pushing this algorithmic style out in all their pumps. But I genuinely think in about 2 to 3 years, when everybody's on it, they're going to go, oh, we have to update these and we're going to have an entirely different algorithm to manage the next level. But it's only because we're not there yet that they've chosen the wrong algorithm for now, because it's easier, it's faster to get it out there. And the other thing that is worth entirely pointing out in terms of regulation is that the pump is regulated, it's a medical device. But any software that runs on the phone is not a medical device, it's just a supporting app. So there's no regulation required in that at all. So they can do whatever they want. No one's going to check them on it.
Yeah, like I mean, like it's such a fascinating field. Like I think once you get into kind of the medical tech world, so a module that I taught at one point in my teaching career was kind of a module on kind of errors and as you mentioned, like failing fast, failing loudly, and so forth. So kind of like offensive programming, which is kind of like a reaction to overly defensive programming. And I think a lot of the thinking from that comes from so back in the day, this is where kind of the lean startup stuff started, is kind of the Toyota factories in Japan. And they had this concept of an andon cord. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So like there was a cord that anyone could pull at any time, and the entire product line stopped until the issue was resolved. It doesn't matter who you are, if you're just a guy applying the paint, or you're the first guy to like interact with this thing or whatever, anyone could pull it. And like if it gets pulled, then the entire team needs to come and resolve it right now. And like I find that approach very interesting, and I kind of like, I think I tend to take the same approach in my coding as well, where like it's interesting. I kind of do very much the same, where like I think this is also one of the things that you kind of see the distinction between juniors and intermediates and seniors, is that juniors kind of go out of their way to prevent errors from happening. Whereas I think as you get more senior, you go out of your way to prevent more errors from actually happening. So you're like,
anticipate it better.
Exactly. You're like, you actually actively seek for cases to throw. So you're like, you kind of anticipate invalid states. And I think in the web, you actually, I can't speak to like other types of software and stuff, but on the web, like just refreshing your browser is such a trivial thing that most software that I work on, if you just get a little sniff that something is like, this thing seems a bit weird, you just like, say completely throw the app and you tell the user just restart the browser. Because once you start getting into that invalid state, then there's assumptions being made on top of that invalid state, and there's being assumptions made on top of that and that and that and that and so forth. And I think to me, this is one of the big dangers of like AI. Something that I definitely see. This is an entire talk by itself. But I do think the big problem for me with AI in this regard is that I think like it's fine if your prompts are good. But what I often see is what juniors do is they prompt like effectively asks make the error go away. So AI has a tendency to just program even more defensively.
And it's exactly what you said too, in terms of if your prompt is about anticipating the problems, or in this case having invariance where it must never, you're going to get something that's closer, and you're still going to inspect the life out of it to make sure it's okay. But as you say, a junior that doesn't know that or grasp or can't see it coming. And my big worry at the moment is that how is a junior gonna know that that's coming now? Because you've got the companies that are getting rid of juniors because we only need senior. Well, how do they get that experience to make the senior decisions?
That's not even. I don't want to even open that can of worms. There's a really good research paper that I've been reading recently called "The Ironies of Automation." It's around like 1970s. It mostly refers to robotics and the rise of robotics in kind of like factories and stuff. And the big problem is that as things get automated, then we don't maintain the skills associated with doing that thing day out and so forth. But then when we need to override the automation, then it's make or break. So you can think about like a plane. So if the plane is flying like in autopilot all the time, at that moment where you need to switch off the autopilot, something drastically has gone wrong, and your skills like are of critical value at that point. The skill that you haven't been sharpening, you haven't been maintaining. So you kind of get this irony where you're not maintaining the skill, and at the point where you would need the skill now, like the consequences are disastrous. There's no trivial cases where you need to apply the skill anymore. But yeah, I guess we'll see how that pans out.
Because
I think,
we look from an education point of view, and we're not going too far into education, but as a metaphor, I guess, we don't expect 6-year-olds to just know how to do differentiation and integration. That is an advanced skill that you need to know, plus, minus, multiply, subtract. You need to understand numbers and scale and decimal points and understand all that. We don't just drop it on them. We're not going to change that. And yet we'll take junior engineers and just say, you need to know how to do the advanced stuff, because you can skip that. And that's not the way it's going to. And I know people will turn around and say maths is a poor example because AI is going to do all the maths for us. But it can't count. It gives me 3 different answers every time I ask. So,
there's also like I keep on referencing like really old school papers. There's also one by Dijkstra, I think, called, what is it? The crisis of software or something like that, in which like he talks, and I think this was the very first NATO software conference where he presented this talk. I think he spoke about like the big problem back then already was that as our tools get better, the work becomes harder instead of easier. And the reason for that is because there's no physical constraints. So if you're building a building, you're always going to have physical constraints like gravity. You can only build so high. But with software, because there's nothing constraining you, as your tools get better, like it allows you to go further, but then by going further, you're also raising expectations of what should be done, what can be done. So the paradox is that as the tools get better, the job requirement gets phenomenally harder. And we've also seen, but I think like AI is now supercharging that. Another thing I want to also mention is like I really like that test matrix that you had. Like that's really cool. I think I'm going to steal that. It made me think about like it was a test, or what did you call it? Like
the interaction matrix.
Interaction matrix.
I'll put it back up.
Matrix, yes. Like I have a friend, those of you that are listening might know her. So Liz Spannenberg, she's kind of like pretty well-known product designer, especially actually in the world of healthcare and so forth. She's done a couple of talks in terms of user experience in the healthcare sector and so forth. And like she kind of introduced me to like a really cool concept, which is kind of like, which they used to do at the company she worked at before this, where they kind of like do this test where they take a specific feature or they take a specific product and they kind of go like, if there were to be a Black Mirror episode that's based on this product or on this specific functionality, like how would that play out? And I think that's really like an interesting exercise in terms of forcing you to confront like all the ways that something can be either maliciously used or might actually have unintended like consequences that are catastrophic or whatever. And I wish I have this conference talk that I have like having in my head now for a long time, but I just need to get down and actually write it out or like start like kind of formulating it, but like kind of like this idea of in defense of errors. And I do think that like I think we should destigmatize errors, and we should destigmatize kind of error states and failures. And I think that needs to always be front loaded in conversations.
Yeah.
I think especially in
And we
design.
have
Yes.
time now, I think, because people will turn around and say, we don't have time, we have to get this shipped out, we have to do this. But we're going through this 10 times engineer at 100 times the speed with AI that
Yes.
everyone's going, everything's moving so fast. But actually, if we took a minute and as engineers took ownership of this acceleration and said, well, actually, look, we're doing everything 100 times faster than we did. If you believe it, I know there's people that would say it slowed them up, and there's other arguments. But as a business, if you're looking, going, we can chug things out 10 times faster. Even let me reclaim 2 bits of that back, and say, I want to refine our processes with that. I want to look at the errors. I want to document this. I want to test that, and I think I pushed it the wrong time. I think it's a genius idea, Skulk, but you can laugh at me. Pride-driven development, PDD, right?
Yes.
It's flopped. I think I'm joking that I released it in the summer when everyone was holidays and it hasn't caught on. But I think unless we take action now and stop putting off those things that we know that we're doing wrong, it's those things we're rushing, we don't have time. Well, actually, if we are now genuinely going faster, whilst business owners may understand that we are going faster, we can reclaim part of that time back and say, well, actually, here's the safety, the reassurance, the audit trails that we're putting into place, and you're still getting an 80% improvement instead of,
Yeah.
I'm all for that too.
Yes. And I think, like also credit where credit is due. Like AI can be really helpful in that.
Yeah.
AI can really help you explore edge cases that you didn't anticipate. But once again, it like it's about how you prompt it. So you need to be good.
Isn't it Fable at the moment has blocks in place because they're scared that they haven't identified where the limits of it are. So
yes,
if it suggests that you are coming up with a biological weapon by mistake, you're getting blocked.
Yes.
And I discovered that when I got blocked the other night, and I was like, what on earth? Oh.
Yeah, maybe don't prompt it too much in terms of like edge cases and stuff. Like so let's say, for example, there's a SQL injection, hypothetically speaking. Yeah, you don't want your account to be banned.
I'm doing this purely for training purposes.
Educational purposes. But I think like you can employ that, like if you employ it like properly and good. I mean, you can even look at like this matrix and you can actually, like, I think something that I've also started doing is that has been really helpful to me is asking it, like, look at the code. What are things that you feel is not being explained or is not self-evident enough in the code? And it's actually pretty good with that.
Compared to even 18 months ago, where if you asked it to refactor a bit and explain, it couldn't do anything useful. It has come on.
Yeah,
still not wonderful, but it's come on.
Yes, but you should also be careful, because if your prompt is do not ever let the blood sugar level go below or above this, you don't know how it's going to prevent it from doing that. Yeah. For all you know, it might have an impact in terms of, like, I mean, like this happens all the time. Like, it changes the tests to make it pass. I fight with my juniors about this all the time. I ask them to fix a bug, and then they come back, and sometimes it's very blatant. It's just like comments out the tests or whatever. But sometimes it does stuff more insidiously, where it like maybe checks the thing in a different manner so that it doesn't throw an error when it should have. And once again, like, this is this thing about, like, if your prompt is going to be make this error go away, like, it's gonna make that error go away. But that error is serving a purpose. So I think another thing as well that kind of concerns me a bit, and I saw this maybe a couple of months ago, is specifically when it comes to UIs, because I do think how something looked used to be a pretty good indication of how much work was put into it. So
not
So
anymore.
exactly, because the
Well,
AI can
that's not fair because some of the stuff you see, you just look at it and go, that is AI
yes,
made. So
yeah,
I
sure,
don't think the full skill of UI is ever going to disappear. I
mm,
just think it's like a senior and junior engineer, the basic stuff,
yes,
but you need to know the journey.
no, sure, but I also think us that are in the world of software kind of have a bit of a like more heightened sensitivity to that. Whereas, for example, my mom wouldn't be able to tell if something was created by AI
True,
or not.
true, yeah.
But like she would very easily be able to see, like before AI, this user interface just looks like absolute garbage compared to this other one that's slick and polished and whatever. And yeah, and I think that I'm still kind of wrestling with. I don't know how to make sense of that because so here's a good example is so maybe 2 weeks ago I had to convert a WebP file to a MP4 file. And like obviously I don't have dedicated software to do this. I usually just Google like whatever like WebP to or WebM to MP4. I just upload it, and like it usually is like, oh, you can only do 3 a day unless you sign up for the pro plan. And I'm like, cool. I just want once off and I'm done. But I did it a couple of months, like a couple of weeks ago, and literally like all the first 10 results that I hit were clearly stuff that was just like vibe coded. And like all of them had like some weird thing where you generate it, but it's like pixelated or the aspect ratio is all messed up or whatever. It's just like there's some little part that's not working as it should or whatever. And like I never had that problem before. And I think because like there's this paradox where because like it required effort to build something, that kind of ensured that you're only building something if you think you can solve the problem well. Whereas now it basically requires no effort. So now you have maybe 2 or 3 good pieces of software that do that. That's getting drowned out by all the stuff that was just like one shot prompted and uploaded. And like, so I also work for a company, or I do a lot of work for a company called Palmetrics, which kind of is like a dashboard where you can all your e-commerce. So if you're selling on Amazon, you're selling on Takealot, you're selling on like Shopify or whatever, you have a central dashboard where you control all your pricing and your stock and whatever. And I think we were probably the first company in South Africa to do this. And maybe the last 1 or 2 years, like just like been so many low effort like copycats have just like sprung up, and so many of the users that we get now came from one of those services, and like just yeah, but like stuff like literally, oh, it accidentally set all my products to be like 2 cents, you know. And it's like, and they just lost all this, or it said my stuff's out of stock when they like it wasn't, or whatever. So and yeah, and that's also very interesting and new to me because once again, you could probably tell from how something looked previously. Like, yes, this thing looks dodgy. Like, I don't know if I want to trust this, but now everything looks so sleek and polished. But it's so bad that literally a month ago, we stumbled across a quote-unquote competitor that just like popped up out of nowhere. And in their terms of service, they literally had our company registration number in the terms of service where it said like, but it had their name.
Reproduced from this.
Yeah, and like we messaged them and we're like, what the hell? And they were like, oh no, they got a developer or they paid some legal person. They don't know what happened. Like they'll look into it or whatever. I'm like, yeah, you probably just pointed AI at our product and said, rebuild this for me. But the problem is like now because they built it like in an afternoon. I think we've been doing this now for a decade. So you run into all like literally what you're showing here, like all these edge cases where it's like, oh, you know, like the classic thing is like, you know, what if 2 people like when is something out of stock? So let's say there's one of something left, like. When does it become out of stock? Is it when someone puts it in their basket?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure, but then someone just puts it in their basket and it just stays there forever and no one can ever buy it ever again. But then it's like, okay, if they check it, if they purchase it, does it then become out of stock? But then you run into the problem where you have two people going through the purchase flow for the same item, and one of them finish it first. What then happens to the second one once their purchase flow like finishes? They've paid the money or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, someone just completed it right. So you run into all these weird situations, which like you really have to like sit down and have conversations and rack your brain, and there's no good answer. You have to figure out how do you mitigate like all the sharp pieces of this. Yeah, and it's like, but the problem is like now it's very hard for users to tell like what products have done that work and kind of really polished like because once again that would usually be reflected in terms of how the UI looks as well. But I don't know. Like it's going to be impossible, I guess, to tell.
It's not till you press the buttons that you find out the problems.
Yes, and I'd be curious as well. Like whether there's the same type of thing in the medical world, because as you mentioned, like the software itself isn't actually doesn't need to be licensed and quality assured and whatever. Yeah, and like I spoke about that. That module that I taught on like errors and whatever, and the classic one that people always mention is the Therac 25. I don't know if you know about that.
Oh yeah, sorry, I've heard. Yes, the nuclear.
Yes, exactly. That just gave people fatal doses of radiation.
Yeah.
And that is also a very good example where you had all these factors that in isolation was perfectly fine, but the whole, when they were combined together, the way they interacted caused like literally people to get fatal like doses of radiation.
And I think that's sorry, it had gone out of my head, but I remember it was Cape Town in particular. Actually, I had about 6 or 7 people came up to me afterwards to tell, had I heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah. And you sort of go, well, it doesn't actually matter, because what have you done about it since?
Yes.
How has training and testing changed? How has attitude and testing changed? Like what I am proposing that people like, so interaction matrix is I've just formalized something that some people do anyway to an extent, but that should have been done 30 years ago. Why is this only new now? And I think, like, I don't mean to rant, but that's a perfect example where history repeats itself. And the reality is that we don't stand up. So like the Horizon scandal, for example, the post office thing in the UK, it was in the headlines for the guts of 2 years off and on between investigations and things happening. Do you know how many times there was a question mark over the engineering and the testing ability of the software? None.
Yes.
Why was every competitor to that particular company not standing up and going, did you test your software? It was because everybody's in the same hypocritical boat. They can't stand over it. So it's a perfect example that I think of where we know where the problems are, and I think in 25, 30 years time we're going to be going, did you ever hear about that diabetic pump? Well, that's the next it's the next new thing, and we still haven't changed,
I'm of the opinion, like I'm increasingly coming of the opinion that the only real solution, and I think especially now that I almost feel like paradoxically seniors are more sought after now, than because of AI and whatever, seniors are becoming even more in demand. I think like the only way forward is for people to use their leverage and to be like, if you want me to work on this thing, if you want me to lead this project, like these are, it's give and take. These are non-negotiables. And I know that like I feel this, I say this with accessibility as well. I think we've played this game for very long where it's like, oh, there's a business case for accessibility. And, you know, if you service all you cultivate goodwill and whatever, but it's clear that's not working. Accessibility is getting worse and worse and worse every year statistically. And I think the only way forward is like, you have to be like, there is no business case here. Like this is to the detriment of the company, but this is something I'm going to enforce. Otherwise, you need to find someone else. Like, to me, this is a hard line, and I think that's the only way forward. But yeah, cool. This was really great. Thanks so much. And where can people find out more about you? Get in touch with you if they have any specific questions. As mentioned, most people don't necessarily watch these streams live, but they kind of watch them afterwards on YouTube and so forth, especially since they are in the evening. But if someone's watching this after the fact or whatever, how can they get in touch with you if they have specific questions or they want to share anything with you?
Yeah, so you can contact me on my website, so apunlimited.co.uk. Put a link in the chat maybe in a minute, or tag me on LinkedIn. And I'll take any questions, queries, response, debates, anything that way. And I'm always open for something.
Cool. Let me just quickly check. Is it apunlimited.co.uk?
.co.uk, yeah.
Yeah. Accelerated progress. There we go. I'll just pop the link. Yeah. So you can get in touch with you over there. Also LinkedIn and so forth. Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Andrew. This was really cool. And hopefully we'll chat again soon at some point.
Excellent. Sounds great. All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye. Cheers, man.